Hi again, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Unstoppable Mindset. You know, what's really fun about this podcast is we get to meet all sorts of people who talk about all sorts of different kinds of things. And today we get to talk to a gentleman from England, Jeff Brown. And Jeff, among other things, is an international photography business mentor, best-selling photography business author. He's a public speaker and also the president of the British Public Institute of Photography. I think I said that right.
British Institute of Professional Photography.
British Institute of Professional Photography. Got to say it right. But anyway, and all sorts of other things. He's an adventurous kind of person, as you're going to learn in the course of the day. So, Jeff, I want to welcome you to Unstoppable Mindset, and we're really glad you're here.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on.
Well, I'm glad to do it. And I have a visitor in the studio today, my cat Stitch, who is monitoring this, and I'm sure that if she has any opinions, she's going to voice them, but we'll see. Stitch is a wonderful kitty. She's almost 16 years old, and we love having her around. But anyway, so Jeff, why don't we start by you telling us kind of maybe about the early Jeff growing up and some of those things, and we'll go from there.
So growing up, I grew up in the northeast of England, and I was born in 1970, so I'm 55 now. And back in the sort of late 70s, early 80s, the northeast of England was a bit of a grim place. It was grey. There was a lot of poverty. It was mainly coal mining and shipbuilding, and it was the old sort of mentality of, you know, you go to school, you study hard, you get a job, you stay in the job for your life, you retire, and then you're dead. That's it.
Yeah.
So for some reason, that didn't really appeal to me. And I used to love reading. I read loads of books. I was obsessed with books. Got into books from a very early age, into sort of fantasy type books, Lord of the Rings, The Hobbit, and stuff like that. But it was only when I got into probably about the junior school, so I'd gone through the infant school, I got to about 8 or 9 year old, that I realized there was something the matter with me, in the fact that I really struggled with school. I wasn't very good at it. Years and years later, I found out I was dyslexic, but I couldn't read out aloud. I had real problems with numbers. Numbers seemed to always look the wrong way around to me. And I got an instant dislike of school and an instant dislike of authority. I couldn't wait to get out of it. But I was quite creative. When I got into fishing, I was good at making fishing flies. I got into photography, and that sort of gave me more of a creative mindset, where I thought, well, I don't want to work for anybody else. I don't want to be told what to do. I want to try and make my own direction. And I decided that I was going to be self-employed, or start my own business at the age of 14.
What did your parents think of your kind of independent mindset or entrepreneurial mindset? Because you must have voiced it along the way.
Well, I did, yeah. And funny enough, I said I had a real dislike of school. I mean, I actually, not overly proud of it, but I was expelled from school at the age of 16. Kicked out of school because I got into quite a bit of trouble. I was very rebellious. I really disliked it with a passion, and I left school with 0 qualifications. So I didn't pass any exams. I failed every exam that I actually bothered to turn up for. But to make matters worse, my dad was a college lecturer, and my mum was a teacher. So so obviously it didn't go down well with having two parents who were in the education system, but they backed me 100%. They could see that I was struggling, but dyslexia wasn't really a thing that was talked about back then. And my dad put forward at the time £1,500 to help me get onto get the equipment I needed and the office space to start my first business.
So I think it was pretty supportive.
Very supportive, yeah. And I think it helped as well that my first business was making fishing flies and tying and exporting fishing flies to fishing businesses around the world. But my dad was keen on fishing as well, so he had an attraction to the business.
Okay. Well, I know that my wife had lots of relatives in England. A lot of them were from the Cornwall Mousel area, and a lot of them, of course, were very much into fishing.
Oh yeah, yeah, I know Cornwall. In fact, I spent a year in Cornwall on Navy Search and Rescue, and that would have been 1998. I think I was there.
Mm.
Very beautiful place.
I've not been. I'd love to go sometime. We'll have to figure that out.
Yeah, it is. It's gorgeous. It's gorgeous.
So you started this business. So you were basically 15 when you started the business, which I think is kind of interesting. That's at a young age, and of course, by the time you were 16, as you said, you got expelled from school, which had to not be very, very much fun.
Yeah, I mean, well, to be honest, so the starting of the business, I used to go into the fishing tackle shops at weekend myself, and one of my friends who I used to go fishing with, and he was good at making flies. He was called Phil. Obviously, I'm called Jeff, and we decided we were going to create a business called PJ Flies. And one weekend, we went into one of the local fishing tackle shops, and we were buying some bits and bobs to make fishing flies with. And the business owner, the owner of the shop, said, "Look, if you bring me some flies down next week, if they're any good, I'll buy them off you." So we walked into the shop and took these fishing flies in the following week. In a little presentation box, and I remember him individually taking each fly out at a time, because he said, "How much are you going to sell me them for?" And I said, "Well, I'll sell them for 10 pence each." So he was taking them out, and I was counting up in my head. And at the time, my pocket money was, I think, it was £3 or £4 a week, and I came out of that shop with a £10 note. So it was double what I was getting paid.
Right.
Off my pocket money, and it was such a great feeling. So that was my first ever sort of dip into entrepreneurship, earning money. And he said, and the last thing he said as I went out the door, he says, if you can make the same amount next week or even double, bring them back and I'll buy them off you. So the following week I went back and made 20 quid.
Wow. What goes into making a fly? I'm not a fisherman by training or anything, so I don't know a lot about fly fishing.
So it's all feathers and furs, and it's all held onto the hook with a very fine thread, like what's called a gossamer thread. It takes a while to learn. So I was taught by an old guy who was a really good fisherman, and he had a caravan on the same caravan site that my parents had, that they used to go on holiday on. And because we never used to go abroad in those days, all the holidays were spent in England. And he saw that I was getting into fishing, and he came and taught me how to tie fishing flies, which was great.
Yeah, and of course, the whole idea behind the fly is to attract the fish, right?
That's right. That's right. Yeah.
So that they will, if you will, take the bait.
Yeah, totally. And the funny thing was, I used to love fishing, but I'd only fish. So I would either put them back in the river, or I'd give them away to members of the family.
Wow. Well, and suddenly fortunes changed, and there you were making flies and selling them.
That's right.
So how long did you do that?
So we got a proper sort of business premises in 1986, so I was a 16-year-old, and we applied for a grant with the then Prince's Trust, which was run by Prince Charles, who's now King Charles, and we were the youngest people in the UK to be accepted for a grant. They bent the rules, and they gave us the grant under the age of 18. So we got the grant at 17-year-old, and then shortly after, we were in a business, sort of a business community, a big workspace with lots of offices with other creative people in. And shortly after the centre had opened, about 6 months after, the manager of the centre came up and says, "Well, look, we'd like you to make a box of salmon flies, but a really good box of salmon flies, all the best ones, and we'll pay you. And it's going to be a presentation box for a special guest who's coming to officially open the business centre in a few months, but we can't tell you who it is." And anyway, it turned out 2 months later it was Prince Charles. He came to visit us, and he was presented with a box of fishing flies, the flies that we tied from.
Wow, that was pretty cool. So you got to meet him.
So yeah, we got to meet him. He talked about fishing. He talked about fly tying. He said he'd been bought a fly tying kit for Christmas one year from his wife, who would have been Princess Diana, but he couldn't get away from it. It was too. He found it too complicated and too complex. So he said, "I really admire that that you guys can tie the flies." So it was nice. It was nice to meet him. It was nice to be able to do that presentation box, and we had that business till I was 26. So
10 years,
nearly 10 years. Yeah.
Now, have you met him ever since then?
I haven't met him, but I have met other members of the royal family, because I was my next stage in business. So my next stage in life was to become a military photographer. So I met a few members of the royal family in my capacity as a military photographer. So I went from one avenue being creative, which was the fishing flies, into sort of another avenue being creative. And the funny thing was, I'd never had any intention of joining the military. None of my family were in the military, other than my dad had done his national service, and my granddad had served in the Navy during the Second World War. But just on a whim, one day I happened to be walking past a military careers office, and I thought I'd pop in. I love cooking. I thought, oh, look, I'd seen a picture on the window where you could train to be a military chef.
Yeah. Okay.
So I went in to inquire about being a chef, joined as an aircraft engineer, and then transferred across to become a military photographer. And funny enough, like I said earlier on, that I hate authority and I hate being told what to do, because that came from a hatred of schools.
A school, right.
But I believe that the military was different, because people say, well, if you hate authority and hate being told what to do, why the hell did you go and join the military? But the military was very different in the fact that I put up with the authority because the military give you adventure. It wasn't a 9 to 5. It wasn't a routine job, So it give, and I love excitement. I love adventure. I love the idea of every day being different. So I was happy enough to put up with military life, and I did that for nearly 9 years.
Well, so did you find that the military respected your creativity as you grew at being a photographer, and so you were a photographer so that you were allowed to be creative and do the things that you wanted to do? Or did you find that there was just as much authoritarianism, if you will, and they kept telling you what to do?
No, they were very good at being creative. And funny, the military photography branch, it's only a small branch. It's about 80 people in the Navy photography branch. So by comparison to all the other branches of the Navy, it's tiny. And it's always also a very sought after branch. So basically you have to wait till somebody retires or somebody gives up their position that you can actually request. And I just managed to get in at the right time, where somebody had left, and I applied, and I got accepted and went on to their training course. And their training course is quite intense, 26 exams in 6 months. But all the people who run it are really passionate photographers. So they're all about developing your own creativity. Yes, there's rules and regulations to follow, but it was very different than other avenues of the armed forces. And then, your average working day, you were given a lot of freedom. You were given a brief for a job, but then quite often you would just go off and design that job the way you wanted,
But why did you, since you, I guess you, as you said, joined as an aircraft engineer, why did you decide to look at photography? What attracted you to that?
Because first of all, I didn't realize you could be a military photographer. So it was, and you can't join as a military photographer anyway. It's what's called a sidewards entry branch. So you have to have served 3 years in another part of the armed forces before you can apply. And to apply to get into the military photography branch, you have to pretty much do it on your own merit. So you've got to build a portfolio up. You've got to do all the application yourself. And they also look at your, it's sort of like the way you react to discipline, the way you think on your own 2 feet sort of thing. So funny enough, when I went through the interviews and they looked at my portfolio, they said that my work was pretty poor, but they loved the way I thought, and they loved the way I was driven and would get up early and go out and do stuff. This is, it's the passion and the willingness to learn. We can teach you all the other stuff, but you're showing that willingness and going that extra mile. That's what got us in and got us to be accepted into the branch. It wasn't my skills as a photographer, because I was pretty useless,
pretty new at
but,
yeah.
But they developed that.
So the whole idea of going in and learning to cook and being a chef kind of went by the wayside, huh?
It did, yes. But I still love cooking to this day, and I was still very passionate about it. And I always had a dream of one day owning a pub or running a food pub.
Right. Well, and things happen, but you clearly are an adventurous sort of person, that you even chose to do all of this. And that's in of itself, I think, admirable to do that. So you became a photographer. And so what kind of things did you do during the time you were in the military from a photographic standpoint?
So we would do everything. We do everything from portraits of sort of admirals in uniform, official portraits. We do big presentations and awards. We do a lot of PR photography. So we'd be tasked with a concept or an idea, or being told something is happening, or we want to promote this. So they might say, right, we've got an aircraft carrier coming into your area. Can you come up with some ideas to sort of like really promote it, something that look really exciting, that'll encourage people to join the military? Because one of the big things about the military photography branch, it's about PR. It's trying to get pictures of the military into the newspapers in a positive light. So young men and women go, "Oh, that looks great! I'd love to join," and it saves them an absolute fortune in advertising. So that was a lot of the stuff we did. We create concepts and ideas, and quite often the concept and ideas led to having a lot of fun. I'd say, like, well, what have I got at my disposal? And then an admiral might say, well, what do you need? I'll say, well, I need a few helicopters. I need some fast patrol boats. I need some Marines on ribs lent over these rigid inflatable boats, all camouflaged up with their cam cream on and their rifles, and they'll be in front of the aircraft carrier. Then we'll have the helicopters flying in the background, and all this was sort of basically controlled by us. So we would have headsets on. We'd be talking to the pilots. We'll be directing people. And those shoots probably cost tens and tens of thousands of pounds to put together when you think about it. But it was great to see some of the images come out. And in those days, when I first started doing it, we were shooting a lot of the stuff on film. So we didn't have the benefit of seeing the images instantly, as in, with digital photography.
I was going to say, much less digitally editing it. It was all on film.
Yeah.
When did it migrate over to be more digital?
So we were still, when I was in training, we were using digital, but they still preferred you to do a bit more on the film side of things.
Higher quality.
And they also, I think, for like an archival purposes, they preferred the idea of having negatives and hard print.
Yeah.
But then, towards like the 2004 to 2003, 2004, then they were starting to embrace digital fully and do away with all the film.
Wow.
And obviously there's the cost aspect as well, because with film it costs every time you press the shutter button.
Sure.
With digital, you can take a lot more images, but I suppose it does make you a bit more of a lazy photographer.
Well, I suppose in some senses it can. It just depends on how disciplined you are. Well, you
Yeah.
seem to be a pretty disciplined kind of person, and so you worked at that pretty well, and I can appreciate that. So so when did you start doing photography for the military? When did you enroll in the military?
So that was 1997.
Okay, so you were what, 25, 26, 25?
Yeah, 26. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
26, 27. Yeah.
Oh, well, and the thing about photography or any skill like that that is pretty unique and pretty new for you is that you had to really develop the knack to doing it, but you obviously also had to have a lot of understanding about things like, as you said, PR and all that. I mean, some of that just had to be a little bit more natural, or just you observed so much that you realized the value of it. And as you pointed out, having the whole photography branch in the military had to be incredibly much less expensive for the military, no matter what you wanted them to do, than them doing PR in other ways, because it was all done internally. Yes, and yes, you had to have helicopters and military people and all that other stuff, but they didn't have to pay the company to go out and or didn't have to pay it much to
Yeah.
go out and do the photography because you're the company.
That's right. That's right. And also, some of the jobs were required a certain level of vetting that they couldn't bring a company in unless those people were vetted to, I did quite a few photography shoots on nuclear submarines, which you can't enter a nuclear submarine unless you're vetted to a certain level.
Right. Now, that brings up a point. So let's go back to that. So going into a nuclear submarine base and so on, and doing photography, what was the purpose of pictures for that, since it had to be pretty cleared and it must have been somewhat classified?
Well, sometimes some of the shoots on board the submarine would be like award ceremonies. So
Okay.
people, people are getting medals or achievements, and actually getting a photograph from receiving their award from the captain of the submarine. But then sometimes we would have PR photographs of the submarine sailing, and we'd be on speedboats going down the loch photographing the submarine.
But what you were not doing was taking pictures of things that were so classified that they didn't dare show them to the public or whatever.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which makes sense. So you did that, and um, so you clearly found a niche to do and to work at, and obviously loved it.
I did. I mean, it took a while to get the confidence. I'm quite an introverted person, so where I love taking photographs, and it's easy to take photographs of things and objects and landscapes and that sort of stuff. It's quite hard when you don't have a lot of confidence and you are quite introverted to start directing people and telling people what to do, especially when you had to direct, entire ships companies or groups of 40, 50 people to do a group shot at an awards ceremony. So that was something that took a bit of getting used to and put me out of my comfort zone to become a bit more sociable and a bit less introverted, and also direct people from behind the camera.
Hmm. So you became a director.
I suppose you do, and
In some senses, anyway.
Yeah. And then from another point of view, I soon realized that you might not like directing people, or you might be really nervous about speaking to people you've never met before and telling them what to do. But quite often, the people on the other side of the camera are just as nervous as you, because they don't like having their photograph taken. They feel awkward. So, part of your job as a photographer is to put people at ease and make people feel comfortable.
Yeah. And I think about it as a public speaker. I keep hearing all the time that one of the top fears that people have is speaking and standing on a stage and speaking. And
Yeah.
I finally realized that that's because we're conditioning people to think that it's scary. But the fact of the matter is that, and I still believe this to this day, audiences want speakers to succeed, unless you're just a real jerk.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
Audiences want you to succeed. And I would think that some of that same level of confidence goes into what you do as a photographer. They want you to succeed. And the people who are nervous about you taking their pictures and so on, your job, as you point out, is to kind of help make them feel more comfortable about it.
yeah. And you know, on from your point of view, you know, you want somebody to love the picture.
Yeah.
You want someone to go, oh wow, you know, like actually take away the dislike and awkwardness of having a photograph taken, and you know, it's quite rewarding when you see somebody go, oh wow, I didn't know I could look that good, you know, because you've directed them, you've posed them, you've helped them feel more relaxed,
Yeah.
and they see themselves in a different, because it's quite often it's not that somebody always looks awkward, or you know, they don't take a good picture, as people say, oh, don't take my picture, I don't take a good picture. You know, it's the fact that they've never been directed, they've always felt uncomfortable and awkward, so it comes through in the final image, because they don't look relaxed, they don't look natural, they've got this fake smile, they look uncomfortable.
I know for me, I've never worried about that. Of course, being blind my whole life, I never really cared a whole lot about pictures.
Yeah.
So I love to pick on pictures all the time. So, you know, for example, people say that a picture is worth 1,000 words, and I just point out, yeah, but it takes a whole lot more memory. So, but I appreciate pictures, and I've learned a lot more about photography and appreciating photography ever since September 11th. And part of that was my guide dog, Roselle, at the time, who became a real camera ham hound. She loved to be in front of the camera. And there was one time we were on a Larry King show on CNN, and you know, his shots are and the photographers and everything on the show is basically around, like from the chest up and
Yeah.
so on, and they take pictures. So one day we were going to be on the show, and they made a little platform that Roselle, my guide dog, could lie on. And they said, okay, put her up on there. And I did. And she laid down, put her head between her paws, and that was it. And the director came like about a minute before the show started. And he said, isn't there anything you can do to get her to react more and to be a little bit more involved in the show? And I said, are the Klieg lights on yet? And he said, no. I said, just wait till you turn the lights on. Everything will change. The lights came on. She lifted up her head, started blinking her eyes and flashing her eyelashes, smiling and licking her chops and just having a good old time. She loved the camera. It was so funny.
Yeah, I can't get my dog to sit. He
Yeah.
won't sit in front of the camera. He's a working Springer Spaniel. He will not stay still for 2 minutes. And there's something about it. Every time you pick up the camera, I think he knows that you want to take a picture, and he turns his head away. He'll look the opposite direction.
Yeah, see, Roselle was exactly the opposite. She knew you wanted to take her picture, and she was going, bring it on. She just absolutely loved it. It was so funny. And it was a blessing. But it as we talked about it, as I talked to photographers and other people when we dealt with different interviews and so on, I grew to appreciate the value of pictures and what it was that they were trying to get. And it didn't take any work really to get Roselle to be involved in that. It didn't take a lot of work to get me involved with it, but I gained a greater understanding of it. So I certainly value the fact that there's a lot of reasons for taking photographs, although I also like audio input and other things like that I'm going to see. But still, it's great that we have this technology. And nowadays, of course, because it is so digital, it makes it so much easier.
It does. I think obviously there's, you know, everybody's a photographer now. Everyone walks around with a camera in their pocket, which is, you know, effectively a smartphone, and the quality of the images that you can take on a phone are fantastic. The resolution, the color saturation, they look absolutely amazing. But sometimes I think people forget to stop and appreciate the moment. So everybody's more, getting the picture taken, sticking it onto Instagram, onto Facebook. And also we have all these digital memories, but not many people are printing pictures out and putting them on the walls like we used to in the 80s and 90s, family portraits. And I think that is a big thing that photographers need to be sort of reinventing and encouraging people to enjoy the wall art, personalize the home, have a picture on the wall that brings a smile to your face every time you see it. Because if you take it on your phone, you enjoy it for a second and then it becomes a memory and it goes in. I looked the other day, I've got 14,500 pictures on my phone. So, and I only ever see them, seconds after I take them when I post them on Facebook, and then maybe a year later when a Facebook memory comes up and reminds me, oh, this is what you were doing this time last year.
Yeah. Well, and I understand that, and I also understand what you're saying about lazy photography, because, as you said, you take the picture, you look at it, and it's gone, and you don't necessarily do all you can to make sure that the picture is looking as good as it can look. And sometimes we just rely on the automatic zoom and other things like that to make the picture look good. But the bottom line is that ultimately we're in control of it and really should make the picture as good as we can make it.
Yeah. I mean, that was what we were taught in the military right at the very beginning. And as I say, was starting out on film cameras. It was get it right in the camera. Get it right in the camera. It'll look a lot better and it'll save you hours of time in the darkroom. And then there's a tendency now for photographers to think, oh, that'll do. I'll just sort it out in Photoshop afterwards. And which again takes time. And as a photographer, time is money. So the better you can get the composition and the way a photograph looks in the camera, then the less work you're going to have to do afterwards.
Yeah, which makes perfect sense. And so I appreciate that. Well, so you were in the military for 10 years, and what made you retire from the military? And also, what kind of skills did you learn that you then took away from the military? One of them had to be accepting authority a little bit more, but I'm being sarcastic. But still, what kind of skills and so on did you learn and did you take away? And why did you even leave the military after 10 years?
So I've been a military photographer. I was a military photographer, and there was a new sort of breed of like a new discipline that was coming into our area, into the photography branch, and it was called IA, which is an intelligence analyst. And they believed that photographers, probably rightly, had a real attention to detail and a keen eye for spotting things. And they recruited intelligence analysts from the photography branch to analyze intelligence imagery, satellite imagery, reconnaissance, and then collate this information with other intelligence services like MI6 and GCHQ. So people on the ground, and military listening outposts. And so I got sent to work. So I did my intelligence course, and I got sent to work with the intelligence services for about 2.5 years. Now, while I was doing my job as a military analyst, intelligence analyst, I started getting people coming into my office and saying, "Oh, you're a military photographer, aren't you?" Yeah. Would you photograph my dog? Can you photograph my daughter? It's her birthday. Do you do weddings? Can you do my partner's wedding and stuff like that? So started doing a little bit of stuff on weekends, and then soon realized that there was actually quite a good bit of money being a photographer. So that was it. So that set me on the path of, right, I'm going to get out the military. I'm going to start with my own business. I'm going to go back to being self-employed again, but this time using my skills as a photographer. And I had good photography skills. I had other skills that the military had sort of drummed into me, which was, timekeeping, organization, attention to detail. And that would work brilliant with a wedding, because with a wedding, you've got to organize people. Everything's got to be on time. You've got to have that attention to detail. So I started doing weddings on weekends, and then I left and I decided to go into partnership with another military photographer who was working at the same base as me, and was also from the same area, the same city. So I left first because he was married with 2 kids. I left first to set the business up and get the business bringing in money. And then about 6 months later, the business was bringing in enough money for him to put his notice in and come out and join me full time in the photography business. So, and then it just skyrocketed from there. We ended up having 4 different photography businesses.
Pretty impressive, huh?
It was good, but I think a lot of the stuff that we did is, when we left the military, is you get a resettlement grant to resettle you back into civilian life to get you ready to work for other people. But obviously, we were going to go self-employed, so we spent this resettlement grant of £7,000 on marketing and branding training. So I got 7,000, Kev got 7,000. So we spent a lot of our money on understanding how to run a business, understanding what brand was all about, and brand concept and marketing. And it wasn't necessarily our photography skills that helped us succeed. It was the skills of actually understanding how to run a business and how to market our brand.
Mm-hmm. Which also goes a little bit back to understanding PR and, just as you said, understanding all about business, which is pretty cool.
Yeah.
Well, as you did that, how easy was it for you to integrate back into society and become disciplined enough to run your own business? Because when you were in the military, you had other people who were making a lot of those decisions, but you had to learn something along the way, or figure out something along the way, that allowed you to truly run your own business.
To be honest, I felt quite excited to be going back to it, because obviously, from sort of 14, 15-year-old, I'd had my own business, and that was my first ever job, working for myself with fishing tackle business. And I sort of realized early on that, yes, I don't have a boss, but ultimately the business is the boss, because the business demands from you all the time. It demands how much work you need to put in. And if you don't put the work in, then you don't get the money. But the other good thing about running your own business is you're not on a fixed wage. You have that ability to make a lot more money without having to be promoted or impress somebody else. So for some people, it doesn't work. Like my girlfriend always says, she doesn't think she could do what I do, because she doesn't like that uncertainty of, because every business is ups and downs. You have low moments, you have high moments, but that's life in general, isn't it? And I think you've just got to have more high moments than low moments. But yeah, I love it. I don't think I could ever work for anybody else.
But
I think I'm unemployable. I don't think I can. I don't think I could go into a normal job.
But a lot of those high moments are also moments that essentially you create. It's your mindset.
That's right. Yeah.
Because, like failure, everybody talks about failure. Well, you're going to experience failure in your life. And I have gotten to the point where I tend to react and say there really is no such thing as failure, because failure seems to be an absolute, you screwed up and that's all there is to it. And the reality is, it's not. Failure isn't really the issue. The issue is, okay, you made a plan, something didn't work right. The question really is, now where do you go from here? How do you fix it? What have you learned from what happened? And I think that's really the issue.
That's totally right. And I made a decision back in 2014. So you said, I love cooking, and I had the photography businesses, which were both doing very well. They were all super successful, bringing in the money. And I decided, wouldn't it be nice to buy a really, really beautiful traditional country pub, one with log fires, in the middle of the countryside, maybe a 200-300-year-old building, and run my own pub. So that was my idea. So I found this beautiful little country pub in Durham, in the northeast of England, and it was like a picture postcard country pub. It looked beautiful. It actually had 2 log fires. It had, I think it was about 300-year-old. It had wooden beams, everything. And so I fell in love with it. I bought the lease on it. I ploughed £120,000 of my own money into it. And within 12 months, I'd lost all that money. I was a further £60,000 in debt, and I couldn't see any way out. Because you say, you know, like failure, sometimes people think failure is, that's it, that's the end. They can't see past it. And stupidly, I decided that was it. I couldn't go on anymore. So I tried to drive my car off a bridge. I was drunk at the time, but, you know, luckily I didn't. I just damaged the car. I didn't damage myself. I woke up the next morning feeling utterly disgusted with myself because my daughter at the time would have been 7-year-old. And I realized I needed to get out of the pub and I needed to change a different direction, which I did. So I ran away and I came to the countryside where I live now in Northumberland, and moved away from all my family and my friends, about an hour away from all my family and friends, to restart my life again. And I spent probably about 6 months listening to positivity books and audio books and trying to rewire my mindset, and then take a new direction. And that's when I got into the idea of, because I was in the middle of the countryside, I could run an online business training photographers in marketing and branding and you know, how to promote themselves on the internet. And I could do that with anybody anywhere in the world who's a photographer. So that was my idea, and that's what I went for. And, you know, looking back at it, 11 years on from that, as it would be 11 years in March, when I tried to take my own life, and I thought that was the biggest, worst failure I'd ever had. It was the best failure I ever had, because I've never been as happy. I've never been as stress-free. My work takes me all over the world, speaking and meeting photographers. I have an absolutely amazing community. No day is the same because I'm on all different time zones, speaking to different people, and I just love it. It's stress-free. But, you know, if I'd stayed at the pub, that wouldn't have been stress-free.
So what happened? Why did the pub fail? Or why didn't the pub succeed? And what did you learn from that?
So, well, first of all, I probably fell in love with the idea of the pub, but I probably didn't do enough research. Now, funny enough, it was in an old mining village, coal mining village, that was very, very much based around, if you weren't born and bred in the area, you didn't fit in. So first of all, I didn't think I fit into the village very well. But the profitability in the pub trade is very hard, especially if the building is owned by a brewery and you've got to buy your beer direct from the brewery. It reduces the profit margins. And I just think everything that could go wrong in that 12-month did go wrong. We had staff stealing off us. We had a couple of sabotages to the pub, a couple of really big bills that wasn't expected, equipment going wrong and equipment failing. And yeah, the costs just spiraled out of control.
Just a lot of lack of research.
Yeah.
And I would suspect that you would say that because of that, and because you realized all that, you learned.
I learned, yeah. I totally learned. And I think, you know, that I fell in love with the idea of it. I fell in love with the building, and probably didn't research it. And also, you know, I was great at marketing. I was great at business, but I'd never run a pub before. And yeah, it was probably a bit of I'd probably sort of trying to run before I could walk, in that, you know, might have been better off going and working for somebody else and being a manager or working in a bar. And, you know, the day I opened a pub, I'd never even pulled a pint before. I'd never stood behind a bar and served a drink. So,
yeah. And that's an art in of itself.
Yeah, that's right.
I used to, when I lived in New Jersey and worked in New York, I used to go to a restaurant called Virgil's Real Barbecue, best barbecue, I think, in the country. And so if you're ever in New York, it's Virgil's. Anyway, they'd opened a facility in Las Vegas. Also, they opened a restaurant in Las Vegas. And so last week, when I was at the Consumer Electronics Show, I went there And one of the things I had heard early on when I heard about them opening the restaurant several years ago was that the people who opened the restaurant before they could open it had to go spend 6 months in New York at the original Virgil's learning everything about it so that they could make this restaurant and the food be the same as what they experienced, because they wanted Virgil's to be the same in both places. And they did. And I can say that from my perspective, at least, they did a really great job, and they learned from that, which was exactly what you wanted for the people in Las Vegas to do. And they survived the pandemic, and it's still open. So when you're in Las Vegas next time,
I'm there next week. So I'll have to
Virgil's.
I'll check it out. Yeah.
Virgil's Real Barbecue, best ribs in the country. That's my opinion, and I'm sticking to it, everybody. Well, that's cool. So do you believe that things happen for a reason? I mean, a lot has happened, and of course, the pub closed and all that. Do you believe that things happen for a reason?
I do. And I'm now I think one of the things as well, when you get to that point where you don't believe there's any way out, and you get that low and you get depressed, that you feel that you've got to take your own life. You are right at the very bottom, and I think for you to go to the very bottom and then come back up again, it changes your mindset about stuff. And I never get stressed. I am a very, very chilled out person. If something goes wrong now or something fails, I just go, well, it's happened for a reason. Maybe something better is around the corner. Maybe it's the universe trying to direct me in a different path, And I think the less you live, the more you live by that mindset, the more it opens you up to other opportunities.
Yeah.
It keeps you living it. You're not living in the past, you're living in the future. It was, for the first 6 months coming up here 11 years ago, it was hard to move away from that failure in my mind. I kept playing it over and over again, but playing it over and over again wasn't going to make that failure with the pub any different. The outcome had happened, and what I needed to do was focus on the future.
Right.
Get back together and get myself back together, both mentally and also establish a new business and a new way of life. And that in itself was a massive learning curve, but for the better.
Well, and the reality is that it certainly has made a big difference in your life. And the fact is that, again, it goes back to failure isn't the end all, and failure is probably the wrong way to put it. It's a learning experience. And I think that it's so important to do that. I am like you. I refuse to feel stress. I've been through too many experiences in my life that caused stress. And I've learned that there are always ways to deal with things. And so it's important to not let the stress overwhelm you. I wrote a book that was published in 2024 called Live Like a Guide Dog, True Stories from a Blind Man and His Dogs about being brave, overcoming adversity, and moving forward in faith. And moving forward in faith is part of it. But the whole issue is we focus on our lives on so many things. We think we need to control everything. And the reality is we only control probably much less than 10% of all the things that we experience. But we worry about 100% of everything, and that doesn't help. And so it builds up so much fear and causes so much stress. And if we would just focus on the things over which we really can control, we would be much better off.
It's funny saying that, after leaving the pub, because my mindset was very, very delicate and I had to build my mental health back up, I decided to stop watching the news. So I used to get up and go downstairs and put the news on TV and have my morning coffee and listen to all this negativity, all this drama, every single morning, which I'd done for probably 40, for at least 35 years. And that was it. I've never watched the news since. I don't watch any live TV. I don't watch the news. People say, well, how do you manage? So, well, somebody will tell me.
Yeah.
Something. I said, but most of the time, half the stuff that people get worried about never actually happens. And if it does happen, quite often there's nothing you can do about it because it's the other side of the world.
Well, even if it's in England, you don't have control over it. So why worry about it?
Yeah.
Now, I watch I watch the news, but I do it because I want to get the information, but I won't worry about it. And
Yeah.
there's so much that happens, but I feel that at least there is information to be gained by watching the news. But what I had to learn somewhere along the line is don't take it personally because you don't have any control over it. And there are so many things that go on. But the trick is not to let things you don't have any control over really affect you to the point where you get nervous and stressful again.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that the same thing can be put into social media. People say social media is negative, social media is dangerous, and it depends how you react to it and what you engage on. In my own social media, I follow a lot of photographers, a lot of people who talk about adventures and motorcycle rides and travel and nature. So my news feed is filled with a lot of positive stuff. And if I see something negative or see something sensationalist, what I do is I don't unfriend that person. I just unfollow them so I don't see their content again.
Yeah.
But from the plus side, social media has brought me more opportunity than anything else, and effectively for free. I've traveled a lot because of my work. I have over 100,000 followers across my social media platforms, and social media brings me customers, brings me clients. It helps me sell books. So there is a lot of positivity to it. I suppose the negative is only if you engage in the negative, then you'll feel the negative aspects.
Yeah. Well, and the reality is that, again, it's how you approach life. And you've clearly learned a lot about how to approach life in a much more positive way. You've developed, we'll call it an unstoppable mindset. You've developed a mindset that allows you to go through life and do the things that you need to do and focus on the things that you can, and you leave the rest of it alone.
Yeah, totally.
Which makes a lot of sense. Well, for you talked earlier about the fact that you have dyslexia, and you've been with dyslexia for most of your life, or maybe all of your life. It's interesting. Yeah. I've talked to so many people who didn't know that they had dyslexia when they were in school and so on, and experienced a lot of the same frustrations and kinds of experiences that you've experienced. And somewhere along the line, they finally discovered that they had dyslexia. How did that, when you finally realized that, what did that do for you? How did that really affect you?
Well, funny enough, I can remember a moment where I must have been about 8-year-old, where a teacher, and back in the 70s, teachers weren't as kind. Mm-hmm. Weren't as kind to school children as they are now, and this teacher singled me out in front of the class and told me that I was stupid and I wouldn't amount to anything because I kept struggling with this reading and my numbers. And at the time, I was chubby. I had ginger hair, so I didn't have a lot going for us in the popularity front, and also being the stupid one in the class. So I found it really negative, and I found it really, really personal because I didn't realize that I was dyslexic because nobody knew what dyslexia was. Now, when I got to my mid-30s and I went to train to go into the work with the intelligence services and be an image analyst, I had to redo my English and maths O-level qualifications that I should have passed at school, but obviously I didn't. I had to do them through the military, and that was when I found out I was dyslexic, and I didn't actually know what dyslexia was until I read up on it, and then it all made sense. Why I'd struggled for so long. I have my own workarounds. I know what my issues are. I mean, now with my work, there's so much out there that helps you as a dyslexic. You have spell checker, you have read aloud, where you might not be able to see it. So quite often I'll do a social media post, and I'll get Word document to read it out loud so I can hear it. But if I read it back, I can't see the mistakes I've made because my mind doesn't process that. I know when I write a number down, I probably write it down the wrong way. So if somebody gives me a phone number and I phone it and it's dead, I just change some of the digits around and
figure it out. Do you use technology like Dragon, naturally speaking, to dictate?
I tend to. So I've started using only in the past 6 months, because I was quite sort of against AI, and well, not against it, but everybody was jumping on the chat GPT bandwagon, and I always tend to do something different than everybody else does. So 6 months ago, I jumped on a piece of software called Claude, and because I've written 5 books now, I've written 4 business books, so I've written a travel book. I also had a lot of content to give to Claude, to feed Claude, and then I had transcripts from my YouTube channel, and then I give him some do's and don'ts about, tone of voice and language, and I would never say things like this, I would never say things like that. Told him that don't be spelling color without a U, don't put a Z in sympathize, because not American English, it's English. And the funny thing is, like over the past few months, he's pretty much replicated my tone of voice, so I can get Claude to write me a social media post, and then I just tweak it slightly and I'll make some changes, and then when I've written that social media post, I give it back to Claude and say, can you identify the changes that I've made from what you've originally made,
right?
And take them on board for the next one, and then he'll give a summary of the changes, and it's quite impressive. It's quite scary as well, because he says things like, "Am I becoming more Jeff?"
Yeah,
it's like, yeah, you are a bit.
Well, the other thing is there are programs and technologies, as I mentioned, like Dragon, which is a technology that you can get where you dictate and it recognizes your voice, and it will then convert what you say directly into a digitized form, which is pretty cool. I use Dragon when I write a fair amount, and so that goes back far earlier than AI. Although I'm sure that there are AI components to Dragon, naturally speaking, today, but it's a great program, and it makes writing a lot easier. So rather than typing on a keyboard, I'm speaking, and it is essentially taking what I write, and it just completely digitizes it by recognizing my voice and then putting it out in a digital form for me. I can use it with Microsoft Word and other things like that.
Yeah.
Well,
and then do you listen back to that and then give edits on what has been done?
Yeah. I just go back and read the Word doc, and but it literally is a transcription of what I say. So I can then go back and say, okay, let's fix this, or everything is fine. And I can even go back and figure out what's misspelled if there are things that it misrecognized, but it works pretty well.
Yeah. Technology is fantastic. It's also got its I suppose worrying sides for creative people, where there's a lot of creatives that potentially AI could really damage their careers going forward. So it's interesting to see which direction it's taken. Work with it, but then also be aware of it.
Yeah. Well, you still need to take control.
Yeah.
So what's the most unusual or interesting country that you've ever visited, since you do so much traveling?
I've been to North Korea. So 2019, I went to North Korea for New Year's Eve to celebrate New Year in Pyongyang Square with another 100,000 North Koreans. There was only 12 Westerner tourists in Pyongyang at the time, and we were there for 10 days. So I've done North Korea, which it took a bit getting into North Korea. It's not as easy as just, you can't go on and book a holiday, you can't choose a hotel. It all has to be done through a third-party agent, and it took about 6 months to get the whole thing together. But it was very interesting. It was a completely different than anything I'd ever experienced before. And it's also supposed to be one of the safest countries you can travel to, because you're followed by the North Korean secret police everywhere you go, even inside buildings, when you're in restaurants, when you're in bars. that nothing could ever happen to you, but the North Korean people would never dare to come up and speak to you anyway. You know, but the thing with North Korea is everything is orchestrated. Everything is set for you arriving there in advance. So you only ever see what they want you to see. You never see the other side of North Korea. I've also been to Chernobyl, where the disaster was. That was absolutely fascinating. And last year I went to Transnistria, which is one of these countries that doesn't exist. It's not officially recognized by the UN. And that was like stepping back into the 1980s. That was, but everywhere I've been, you know, I think that's the other thing is I've learned to travel with a really open mind, and you know, I tend not to worry. I've just booked 2 more holidays for this year, and the last one will be my 70th country that I've been to, and you know, out of all my travels, touch wood, I've never had anybody be. You know, I always say that 90% or 99% of people in the world are probably good people.
Yep.
So just don't go by preconceptions. Just because you go into a country where you don't understand the culture, or you've heard different opinions about it, quite often the people in that country are lovely, you know.
Well, and I find that if you go somewhere, wherever it is, if you treat people well, they're going to treat you well.
Exactly. Yeah. Treat people like you expect to be treated.
So, what are your plans for this year? What are your big plans? And also the other, and kind of the last question I have to pose is, what would you advise for someone who wants to start out in a business, whether it's photography or whatever? What kind of words of wisdom do you have?
So my big plans for this year is to do a lot more public speaking and outside of the UK, do more traveling, more places. As I'm in the US next week, I'm in Vegas and then Miami. I've just booked some workshops in Prague, which is nice to have some in Europe. So yes, that's some of my big goals, to keep on traveling, but also be able to travel for my business as well. But I think one of the big things for anybody starting a business is to understand what brand is, because a lot of people don't understand brand, and brand is ultimately what makes people set a price on something and determine something. And brand is what people think, feel, and believe about you and your products and your services and your business. And if you want to charge a higher end amount for your products and services, then you need to have a brand and a message, and you need to have that connection. So I think it's really, really important that, okay, you perfect your skills in whatever your business is, but branding is so important. If you want to stand out, you want to be different, you want to connect with your potential clients. But the other thing is, we have more opportunity available to us now than we've ever had, through likes of social media and email. That means that if you set big goals and you plot out a direction and ideas to get to those goals, quite often, though, if you're persistent and you just do it one step at a time, you'll achieve them. And I believe that. And pretty much every single goal I've set over the past 10 years for the business after my failure has come true. I've done it.
There you go.
But I never did it overnight. It was just consistency. It's a bit like social media. You know, everybody starts off with one follower, but if you're consistent and you connect with people and you post and you engage with people, then your following will grow. And it's like going to the gym. You know, if you keep exercising, you'll get fitter and you'll get stronger.
Well, it still means you got to do the work.
Yep, you've got to do the work. Yeah.
Well, Jeff Brown, I want to thank you for being here. This has been fun. Can you believe it? We've been doing this now for over an hour.
So we have, yeah.
Time flies. Well, I want to thank you for being here, and I want to thank all of you for being out there and observing the podcast, listening or watching it, or both. We appreciate you doing it. If people want to reach out to you, Jeff, how do they do that?
So you can find me on Facebook, just Jeff Brown, the photographer's mentor. You can get me on LinkedIn, where I am very active, Jeff Brown, the Photographer's Mentor, or you can visit my website, which is www.thephotographersmentor.com.
Well, great. I hope people will reach out and maybe you'll get some business. That would be great. And if you, unless I get over to England first, if you ever get to Southern California, let me know. I'd love to meet you in person.
And thank you very much for having me on. And also thank you to Stitch in the background there.
She stayed here the whole time. This good kitty. Well, for all of you, I'd love to hear from you. Love to hear your thoughts about today's episode. Feel free to email me at Michael, MICHAELHI, at accessibe.com. And we'd appreciate it wherever you're listening to the podcast or watching us today. Please give us a 5-star rating. But even more important than that, please, by all means, give us a review. Review the podcast. We love your reviews. We appreciate them very much. If you know anyone who ought to be a guest on the podcast, Jeff, including you, if you know anyone, we'd sure appreciate it if you'd introduce us. We're always looking for people to tell their stories. And with that, again, I'm going to say, Jeff, we really enjoyed you being here. Thanks very much.
It's been a pleasure. Thanks for having me on board.
If you're ready to go deeper into the ideas that shape how we see ourselves and others, I have a free gift for you. Head over to michaelhingson.com and download my free ebook, Blinded by Fear. Keep learning, keep questioning, and keep choosing to live with an unstoppable mindset.